day and welcome to the Minaurum Gold Inc. conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Mr. Sunny Panu, Investor Relations Manager. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, operator. My apologies to everybody. Sorry for the late start here. On the call today, we also have senior management from Minaurum Gold, including Dr. Peter Megaw, co-founder, director, as well as Darrell Rader, president, CEO, and Stephen Maynard, vice president of exploration. Before we begin, I would like to go over our disclosure statement. Some of the statements contained in this presentation are forward-looking statements. Forward-looking statements are not historical facts and are subject to a number of risks and uncertainties beyond the company's control, including but not exclusively statements regarding potential mineralization, exploration results, completion of work program and studies, and future plans and objectives of the company. I would now like to pass it over to our VP of Exploration, Mr. Steve Maynard.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Maynard. I'm Minaurum's Vice President of Exploration, and I manage the Alamos project here in southern Sonora in Mexico. If we can have the next slide, please. We want to, first, this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'll be talking about, first of all, the first phase of the drilling program, and I'll touch on later, then talk about the acquisition of historical data that just happened recently. Then our plans are for the upcoming year, the phase 2 program. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about the new acquisition, the Aurifero gold project, and then we'll be talking more about the 2020 program with our other projects and the catalysts for our company. Next slide. We started the Alamos project in September of 2016. At that time, we knew about the three major producers, historical producers on the project, they being the Promontorio mine, the Quintera mine, and the mines at Minas Nuevas. We also knew that the district had produced something like 200 million ounces of silver since the colonial period up until about the Mexican Revolution, about a century ago. That's what we knew at that time. As we have developed the project through geological mapping, walking around the field with locals who knew where the workings were, the prospects, and so on, we grew our understanding of the project to about 26 vein zones or vein systems. We've also, in an area that covers about 10 kilometers northeast to southwest by 6 kilometers across. In the course of that time, since 2017, we have drilled 40 holes totaling about 18,000 meters of drilling and tested the majority of these zones. Now, we wanted to test the highest priority zones to develop a vein inventory, an understanding of mineralization throughout the district before focusing on any one or two specific zones. And that's what the figure on the right there shows, is that distribution of holes and vein zones. Next slide. We also employed the piano key model. This is a concept that Peter Megaw has advanced and embraced by our exploration program here. We know that the district, that the main vein zones in the district are controlled and contained within horst and graben blocks, that is, up-thrown blocks and down-drop blocks. And many of these vein zones are controlled along those block boundaries, but we also know that some of these vein zones are within the blocks. In the case of the down-thrown blocks, that implies that vein zones could be hidden in those down-thrown blocks so that the present level of erosion has not exposed them. For that reason, we drilled long, shallow angle holes to cut across these zones to explore for these blocks. And that's the piano key model. Think of down pressed piano keys and piano keys that are still uplifted. Next slide. If you compare this to a standard model of epithermal vein zones, you can see this concept of the down key, the up keys of the piano. Again, where an up key, you would have a deeper level of erosion, and on the down key, erosion is not penetrated so deeply, leaving high-grade zones unexposed. In the up key, for example, we have with the vein zones that we have investigated, you can see the La Quintera, the promontorial, and gap targets. These are areas that have been mined. In the down key, you're looking at Europa Guadalupe, the Amalia zone, for example. And it's not shown on this slide, but we encountered a blind zone in hole 30, for example, that is, there's no exposure whatsoever on the surface, and that's within a down-thrown block. Next slide. Now this is a slide that's a list. I'm not going to read it to everybody, but you can examine this at your leisure. You can see the best intercepts we have from various zones here. Just a couple of them. If you look at Europa Guadalupe, this is our best intercept, where we have 8.25 meters of 1.7 kilos of silver and base metal credits. So that's an example of that. Read that at your leisure. But as you can see, we have significant intercepts of mineralization in several of these zones. These are going to be the focus for phase 2 drilling, for follow-up drilling. Next slide. So again, the phase 1 program, we completed this just about a month ago. The idea of this was to drill 1 to 4 holes in each one of the zones. Now, we didn't drill every single one, but we drilled the highest priority zones and about 19 or 20 of the 25 or so vein zones that have been identified. 40 holes, 18,000 meters. In 14 of those 19 vein zones, we have high-grade silver intercepts. So we know that mineralization is widespread throughout the district, and that's what we want to follow up on. So, next slide. The historical data. Recently, and by that I mean just last month, we acquired a set of historical data from the district. This is exploration data that was generated in the 1950s through the mid-1980s. We suspected that this information existed, but we did not, had not found it, and it was given to us by a local resident here in Alamos. The main features of this are the report by Terra Mines, or Terra Mining and Exploration, that was written in 1982. And this is a summary of the underground drilling that was done at the Promontorial mine in the early and mid-1960s, as well as surface drilling at Minas Nuevas and at the northern part of the San Jose zone between 1979 and 1981. It's a total of 40 holes that totaling about, what do I have here? About 8,000 meters of drilling. It also contains compiled reports dating back to 1908. of describing the mine workings. The major thing about this information is that it puts into focus the orientation of the drill zones by describing the workings, why they stopped when they did, which is related to drops in silver price and probably coming to the water table. And then, of course, the Mexican Revolution shut things down around 1910. It gives us further leads for more investigation as well, the names of the companies and so on. So we are actively exploring that. Next slide. So here's a summary of the historical data, what it found. One of the things to point out was the references to unworked parallel veins at Promontorio and La Quintera. This is something that we will be investigating more. Next slide. Here's a summary of the historical data from the underground drilling at Promontorio. Note a meter of 5 kilos. Some of these zones, some of these drill intercepts are below the old workings. 5 kilos, 1 kilo, 2 kilo. Notice 12 meters of 700 grams. 1 meter of 2,000 grams. There's also gold credits noted in one hole. That confirms some of Minaurum's drilling at Minaurum or at Promontorio, where we found gram values of gold as well. Next slide, please. This is a longitudinal section from the Terra Mines report with our annotation on it, showing the location of these drill intercepts from the underground drilling. Notice the boot-shaped outline of the worked area, of the stoped area. Some of these drill holes hit or several of these holes hit remnant mineralization within the stoped area. But more importantly are the intercepts below the known workings, including 2 meters of 594 grams, 8 meters of 274 grams, 7.6 meters of 972 grams. This is telling us that there is potential for extension below the old mining level. They probably stopped at the water table at the same time as prices of silver were dropping in the late 1890s. Remnant mineralization is not our focus here. We're looking for new veins and are interested, of course, in the extension of these veins in a down plunge sense. Next slide. At Minas Nuevas, again, this is in the northern part of the district, there were 2 mines, the Purísima and the Sambona mines. We now, with this historical data, we now understand with far greater detail the plunge, the geometry of those vein zones. The Terra mining drilling project from the 1980s, shows that there are significant intercepts underneath those old workings, and that is something to follow up on. Notice that we have, in the case of hole 1, TZ8001 at the bottom of the slide, notice that there's 1.5 meters of 800 grams of silver. Next slide. Again, at Minas Nuevas, this is the Alamos vein, or the vein parallel to Purísima on its eastern side. The workings here only got to about the 300 foot level or so. The workings you see at the top of this slide are the Purísima workings, which is about 70 meters to the west of this section. There is a whole lot of unexplored ground here. The drilling shows mineralization down dip on this Llamas vein. This is, again, is something to follow up. The author of the Terra Mines report believes that the plunge of this chute is to the northeast, as shown on the slide. Next slide, please. This is the Purísima vein. Here, the author suggests that the plunge is again to the northeast in the upper levels of Purísima, but that he speculates that the ore chute reverses itself at depth. But there's only one hole to show this. This would be another item for checking out with future drilling. Notice the unexplored ground below the 400 foot level, and also a zone at around 300 feet on the northeastern side there, on the right side of the figure. Next slide. So our phase 2 program. Well, the technical committee of Minaurum developed a 3-tier drilling priority list where we sat down, we looked at the results from all of our phase 1 drilling in addition to what we knew about the surface geology and surface sampling, and we triaged that list. We came up with 5 or 6 highest priority zones, they being the Europa-Guadalupe zone, where we had that 8-meter interval of 1.7 kilos. We added to that the Nueva Europa zone, where we had ore-grade mineralization, potentially ore-grade mineralization in drilling from our phase 1 program. The San Jose zone on the western side of the known district. Pulpito in the north. The Minas Nuevas zone, now with this historical working in the historical data and the implication of down plunge vein zones. The Alessandra zone, where we have a high-grade gold sample on the surface, as well as good copper numbers in hole 38, as well as the Promontorio zone, which shows that potential for down plunge projection, extension. At Promontorio zone, again, the old reports describe an unworked parallel vein that was never exploited. So that's of something we want to follow up again. We're talking about starting in March or April of this year on the Tier 1 veins. We plan to do a minimum 20,000 meter program this year. We have more than 200 pads already approved and are applying for about 30 more. The holes will be drilled much shorter and steeper than we did on the phase 1 program. This will give us much better efficiency and rapid production, so we'll be generating news on a more regular basis. We will do follow-up detailed surface mapping in selected areas as well. Next slide. And we are continuing to look around the Alamos district. As you all are aware, we recently acquired the Aurifero gold project. It's to the northwest of the Alamos project. This is a gold prospect that was first discovered, as far as I know, about 100 years ago. Although it may have been prospected before that, but the records are somewhat vague about that. it had seen some historical drilling, and there are campesinos or prospectors actively producing gold from shallow workings in that area. It appears. Next slide. Here's a summary of some of the highlights of the Aurifero project. The figures on the right show some of these shallow surface workings along narrow vein zones in strongly argilically clay-altered rock. It's an epithermal vein system. The land package covers about 1,200 hectares. Of the historical drilling, we see some interesting gold results. 3 meters of 18 grams, 24 meters of 3 grams, 58 meters of 3.6 grams in several holes. These are just the highlights. Has great access and infrastructure, and we have an option agreement with the claim owners. We expect to drill at least a few holes on that project this year. What we will be focusing on is we may do a couple of confirmation holes of the old drilling, but the main thing to remember about this is that the historical drilling rarely went below 100 meters depth, and several of the holes ended in mineralization. So what we plan to do is some deep holes to get under that that previously drilled mineralization to test for greater tonnage, greater width, see what's down below this. Next slide. So with our catalysts now, we'll be starting the phase 2 drilling program this year and carrying out surface generative work for new veins in the project. One point I want to make about the phase 2 drilling program is that we are focusing on new veins and extension, and in some cases extensions of the previous operating zones or operating mines. We're not so much focused on the remnant mineralization in and around the old zones. We don't think that that's where the glory is. We're looking for we're focusing on the new areas and to a somewhat lesser extent the down plunge projections of the old workings. Next slide.
That's the last slide, Steve. Before we go to question and answer,
okay.
Peter, would you like to chime in with your observations?
Yeah, I'd just like to reemphasize a few points that come out of the work that Steve and his crew have been doing so well for us down on the property. Good to keep in mind that the whole point of Phase 1 was, first of all, to demonstrate that there is a district there and wrap our arms around how big it is. We had pretty modest expectations of what was going to be sort of a successful intercept in these veins, and mostly because we know that these are shooty veins, so they open and close along strike, and you don't know when you're putting just one hole into a structure whether you're getting into the fat part of the vein or the narrow part of the vein. But we got a lot of nice, wide, high-grade intercepts. Steve gave you the batting average. 14 out of 26 came in with good, high-grade intercepts. That gives us a lot to follow up on. So we come out of that program quite firmly convinced that we are in a district scale environment. We think some of the regional geologic controls better than we did before. You take that, you dump in all of this historic information that was given to us by a member of the local community who, I guess, was watching us to decide whether or not we were real, and decided we were, and so came forward with these data that they've stashed in their basement for a number of years. This gives us a lot of information and a lot of holes we don't have to drill. So we got a lot of very low to no cost information out of this program that dramatically improves our understanding of the ore chutes, and also shows some of the other features that we've been picking up on, which is that there's multiple stages of mineralization in this district. There's silver dominant veins, there's silver copper dominant veins, there's veins with gold in them, there's lead silver stages, and some of these older reports, which had much more face information or information from the mines where you could actually see the cross-cutting relations, gives us a lot of that feel. And obviously we've been tantalized over time by these gold numbers that we've been picking up. And so we're hoping that some of this historical data will give us a chance to sort some of that out as we move forward into phase 2. I mean, we now have a number of veins that are just, they've got their hands up saying these are our tier 1, drill 50 meters below the intercept that you've already got in hole 5. Drill 150 meters along strike. Try to understand what the comportment of the ore chute is that hole 7 represents and some of these other intercepts represent. And one of the final things to say is we've explored about 6,000 hectares of a 37,000 hectare property package. And we know that there are additional prospects and some old workings elsewhere in this property package. If you look at something like page 16 in the presentation with the topographic work that we've done, you can see how the structures coincide with topographic linears, and you can see there's a lot of topographic linears there that we haven't tested. And part of that's because they're covered with alluvium, but we understand that there's additional structures there to test. So district scale is what this is all about. This district has proved, has produced, and some of the historic data that Steve was alluding to also confirms our estimates that the district produced 200 million ounces. That puts Alamos into the category of a significant producer. It's not yet in the top league, but that's a good track record to build on, especially in a district where in a very short order we've been able to prove that there's a lot more potential here. So I really like what I'm seeing in this district, and really pleased with the work Steve is doing. And finding Aurifero another 30 kilometers up the road with what looks to be a very high level of exposure. That alteration that you can see, the argillic alteration, looks like what you'd expect at a very high level with the shallow drilling that's been done there before. And it's most of the shallow drilling, most of the drilling that was done by people who were looking for open pittable, broadly dispersed, relatively low-grade mineralization. That doesn't appear to be what that district is. It appears to be a high-grade vein system. So we're potentially getting in there as the first ones really try to explore it on that kind of basis. So I think the potential there is very good. So that's what I have to say at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Sonny, did you want to go ahead and start the Q&A procedure?
Sure. Operator, please start the Q&A question period, please.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please signal by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. If you're using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. Again, press *1 to ask a question. Please state your name before posing your question. We'll pause for just a moment to allow everyone an opportunity to signal. And once again, that's *1 if you wish to ask a question. It seems that we have no questions over the phone at this time.
Okay, well, we had several questions that came in through email, so I'll just go through those questions here, and I'll direct it to the senior manager of Minaurum. One question comes from a gentleman in the States, and this question is directed to Peter Megaw. Peter, how does Alamos compare to other silver districts that you have worked on, most notably in the Fresnillo district?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a good one. It's difficult to compare anything to Fresnillo. Fresnillo has proven itself to be the world's largest epithermal vein camp. It's now past Cerro Rico de Bolivia in terms of size. But Alamos is comparable in the exploration philosophy sense in that Fresnillo was a minor district, 250 million ounces. So in the same kind of league as Alamos until 1976, when blind veins were discovered applying what became the Buchanan model, and it was recognized that there was much more of the system there. So 3 billion ounces of silver have been discovered there since 1976. I've worked in several other epithermal vein camps in Mexico, like Bolaños in Jalisco for Kennecott back in the early 80s. Same kind of thing. Significant but not huge historic district applying modern geologic understanding of these systems and the model. Major additional ore bodies were found. So to a certain extent, the important thing is to recognize that the old-timers didn't find it all, and that they stopped for a lot of different reasons, many of which were social or economic, and that some of these districts still have significant potential. And a lot of it stems from the fact that our success at Alamos stems from the fact that we acquired a project or a district that had been put together from a patchwork of isolated claims. So you need to be able to put the district together and understand it on a district scale basis, and that's the path we're following. That's what led to success at Fresnillo and Bolaños and a number of other camps, and I think will lead to additional success at Alamos.
Thank you, Peter. We have another question from a gentleman, Stefan from Zurich. And he asks, was there underground drilling at the historic Quintera mine, and did the historical data include anything on Quintera? And this question is directed to Steve.
Yeah, was there underground drilling at Quintera, and tell me again the second part of that?
The second part is, did the historical data include anything on Quintera?
Yeah. I don't have any, it's possible that there was underground drilling at Quintera, but I don't have any record of it. The historical data I received did not include any of that. We do have maps, level maps, and longitudinal sections of the Quintera mine workings, though. I have that. There are descriptions in the recently acquired historical reports. There are some descriptions of the Quintera mine. They include descriptions of the lower workings, saying that the vein is still strong in the lowest workings, as well as mention of a parallel structure on the western side of the Quintera mine.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Another question comes from Paul from London, and this is directed to both Peter and Steve. But how do you prioritize the drill targets for the next phase of drilling, which would be phase 2?
Well, I mean,
Peter, you want to take that?
I'll jump. Sure, I'll jump in on this. I mean, the way you prioritize them is look at the width and grade of the intercepts that you got the first time out. Plug that into what you think your geologic understanding of the nature of the dilating zones or opening on the structure is, and follow up from there. I mean, it's no secret or surprise that we're going to go after hole 7 as the first offset target, because that's where we got 8 meters of almost 2 kilos silver. And we think, based on the information we have, plus the historic data, we have an idea what the comportment of that ore chute is, and that's what we'll follow up to start with. So it will be a process like that, and this is all based on surface, what little we can see on the surface in some of these, strength of mineralization and width of mineralization, plus style of mineralization, because what we're recognizing is that the biggest high-grade veins in this district tend to be the copper-silver ones, as we understand it now, so those would be the ones that we would go after first.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that we've done extensive surface mapping on these zones, so that which plugs in, as Peter said, into our geologic understanding of what the geological framework of each one of these vein zones is. So that also informs our decision. Another consideration, it's a lesser consideration, but it does figure in, is logistics, is just how do we get to these zones through a network of roads and trails. So that figures into it as well.
Okay, thank you. This question comes from Peter from Switzerland. I guess this is directed to Peter. How does your project compare to Silvercrest?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll just say that's sort of an unfair question because Silvercrest has done essentially what we're doing, but they are about 4, maybe 5 years further down the road from what we are. But they're very analogous approaches. It's district scale approach, recognize what the best structures are in the district, what the highest grade structures are, and then proceed to drill them off from there. They started before we did, so they're well ahead of us. They're very similar styles of epithermal vein camps. So that's probably the fairest comparison that you can make.
Okay, thank you. Operator, I'll just go back to the operator. We do have a couple more email questions, but I'll just switch it back to the operator to open up the line for any questions from the conference call. Operator, can you check on that, please?
Absolutely. I do see one caller in the queue here. Participant, your line is now open. Please state your name before posing your question.
Yeah, hi, it's Matt O'Keefe from Cantor Fitzgerald. Just a question on that historic data set that you've acquired. Is it just like a few sections, or is it boxes and boxes of data? And have you digitized it? And how has it changed your plans for your phase 2 drilling at this point?
Want me to take that?
Yeah, you're the one who's plodded through this stuff.
Yeah, right. No, it's not boxes and boxes. It's a stack of files that measures about 10 inches high. In bound reports, one of the reports contains folded cross sections and maps as well. We have scanned all of the information and loaded it into our file system. We have not digitized very much of it yet. That's a project that we're in process. So that's as far as we've gotten with that. How does it affect the prioritization? Well, as I was saying earlier, the implications of the down plunge projections will figure into our prioritization of drilling. Those holes will happen in some fashion. We haven't determined just what and where yet, but that will be part of it. It's, in my mind, it's already moved drilling at Promontorio and at Minas Nuevas into Tier 1, but where it's just in what order we do it hasn't been determined just yet. Now, the other is that, as Peter pointed out, it represents 40 holes. And those are holes that we don't have to drill now because we have that information. One thing, though, that we do have to do is that we have to locate exactly where these holes are on the ground. If I know that there were many holes drilled at Minas Nuevas that aimed at Sambona or Purísima, I don't know exactly where those collars are. When I say that, I mean I don't know within, say, a radius of 50 meters where they are. So those are details we still have to work out, and then work our prioritization off of that.
I think I'd chime in with it. I'd actually chime in with one other point, is that these holes were typically drilled from as far down in the mine as people could get. So this is in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. These old mines were rehabilitated. They got underground. They drilled under as far as they could from the drill stations that they could establish. And they cut good mineralization below that. One of the questions you always have exploring in an epithermal vein camp is, how deep does the mineralization go? What is the, you try to determine what the boiling level is and then how far mineralization continues below that. And we've added, from what I can tell looking at the data, at least 100 to 200 meters of completely open potential throughout the district. So we've, in all of the structures, we can now conceive that mineralization can go a lot deeper than we thought before. And that opens up a lot of ground for exploration. And then when you plug that into the piano key juggling things up and down, it really gives you a different perception of what the tonnage potential will be as you work your way down in this district.
Okay. Well, that's great. No, thanks
let me
for
just make one clarification. Yeah, let me just clarify one point. The drilling at the Minas Nuevas area was all from the surface. There was no underground drilling, or at least not in the reports I've seen.
Okay. Yeah, great. That's it for me. It looks like no, that's very helpful. Thank you. Looks like you're going to have a very busy summer.
I think so.
Thank you, Matt. We have a couple more questions here. I got one more question here. Michael from Vancouver, and his question is directed to Peter Megaw. At Ontario, given the historical data now in hand, does this change the perception of the vertical mineralization window of potential?
I would say that's the question that I just answered, that absolutely, that these data are showing us that mineralization continues deeper than we thought. I mean, we had some semi-apocryphal comments in the old mining literature that the vein was still strong at the bottom of the mine and stuff like this, but we now have observational data from relatively recent times that confirm that, plus the drilling that confirms it as well. So yes, it adds materially to our perception of how deep things can go.
Okay, great, thank you. We've got a couple questions for Darrell Rader. This is a question from Robert from Toronto. How is Minaurum going to increase its news flow moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. We basically did mention this a bit earlier in the presentation that we're going to be speeding up the number of drill holes drilled just by changing our methodology a bit here. As many of you know, in our phase one, we were focused on drilling long, shallow angle holes and maximize the number of veins that each individual drill hole could intersect. These holes provided a lot of geological data. The issue being, because of their shallow angle, they ended up taking probably on average about 1 month per drill hole per drill. So even though we had 2 drills going, we were only putting out 2 holes a month in production. And of course that would take, say 3 to 4 months to get a batch of drill holes ready for the next news release that goes out. Coming to more conventional, steeper angle drilling and drilling off the individual targets, typically on average a man-portable rig does about 1,500 meters per month production. On our average depth, I guess, for the first phase, we were doing typically 500-meter long holes. So that would tell you that in the second phase here, we should be seeing at least 2 to 3 holes per rig per month. Naturally, that gives us a much a larger batch of drill results, much faster than traditionally to release to the market. So I would anticipate once everything's going, the logistics are ironed out, and we have multiple rigs turning, that we'll probably start seeing news flow and drill results on a bi-monthly basis, which will be at least twice as fast as in our first phase, and it'll allow us to start really building the story as far as news flow goes.
Okay, thank you, Darrell. And I got one more question by email for you as well. Noah from Atlanta asks, why do you keep acquiring projects when your efforts at Alamos have been so successful?
That really comes down to the way we've structured Minaurum. We built Minaurum to have a pipeline of projects, and the concept behind that, quite simply, is we have a really strong team in place with Peter, with Steve, with David Jones, one of our other senior geologists, and we've always had this, focus on making new discoveries. And part of that is it's a pretty high-risk part of the exploration business, looking for new discoveries, not going for residual mineralization or recycled projects. And since our inception, we've gone through a number of projects. We've probably drilled about 6 projects. We've made about 3 discoveries on those 6 projects. We since then have dropped the 3 projects where we didn't make discoveries. We've replaced those in the pipelines. We've always structured the company to have a pipeline of projects. With the success we've been having at Alamos, I guess you'd say what's happened there is we're allocating about 90% of our expenditures to Alamos, and that is the focus moving forward. The rest of the portfolio, we're sort of slowly advancing. Projects like Santa Marta, we're permitting, or Aurifero, we're going to be doing some drill permitting on. But the concept behind the company remains to monetize its flagship project at some point. We built Minaurum to be able to monetize its flagship project or spin it off at some point in its development. And then we still have a remaining portfolio of projects that we can advance. And it's that structure that is a basis for acquiring the odd project here and there. And I can't say we won't acquire anymore, but I'd say we have our hands pretty full right now, and we're very happy with what we have in the portfolio.
Okay, thank you, Darrell. I'll just pass it back to the operator. If there are any other questions, we'll open the lines again. Operator, can you please go ahead with that?
We do have one more question in the queue. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is open, and please state your name before posing your question.
Hi. Yes, good morning. It's Michael Gray from Genesis Capital. Thanks for hosting the conference call. My question is, with the Tier 1 veins now in focus, to what extent is the program going to be dynamic if you have success either hitting high grade or the fat zones? Will you pivot and really start to focus on that particular vein and start to sketch it in on a particular drill pattern? Or are you going through a phase where you really want to do a first pass now on all the Tier 1s?
Well, this is Steve answering that question. And thanks. That is a good question. The fact that we're going to have multiple rigs, I think, will allow us to focus on such follow up on such an event, say a fat intercept. And that's a decision we'll have to make kind of on the fly as we're going. But we can maintain, as long as we have 2 or 3 drill rigs working, we can maintain our systematic investigation of other veins while we follow up on a let's say we have another hole 7 intercept. We can make that decision as we go. We're not going to be locked into a program that we set, say, now for the rest of the year without changing our priority as we go on. And having 2 or 3 drill rigs working on the project will give us that flexibility.
Okay, no, fair enough. And with the historic data on some of the intercepts at the high grade, was there no base metal data? Certainly wasn't any in the news release, but any base metal data to kind of understand something about the character of the vein system on that front?
No, there wasn't. There are descriptions, kind of narrative descriptions that yes, there is some lead, there is some copper, and that the silver goes with copper. There's that sort of description, but there's no assay data referring to base metals in the project, other than what we have generated in our sampling.
Okay, And then, Peter, because you answered this question in terms of the additional 150 meters of vertical potential, given the historical data, what is the limit to the vertical potential? Is it a classical epithermal model, or is there a bigger window possible at Alamos?
Okay, I think that's an excellent question, and thank you for making me clarify that. First of all, I think 150 meters is just what we get from the historic data, which says that things keep going beyond that. So we don't know yet how far it goes. There are aspects of Alamos that are different from many epithermal vein camps. The copper content is very high. That's not typical to find that throughout the system the way we are here. So this is let's call it a variation on the theme, and we're still trying to figure out what that variation means. We know there's a porphyry copper 5 kilometers away. Maybe that's involved. The Aurifero property lies further to the other side of that porphyry. I suspect that the porphyry is telling us that there was copper there that could be scavenged and incorporated into the vein system. We don't know. But because there's differences between this district and other typical epithermal veins, that sort of conceptually opens up how deep it could go. We may be looking at multiple stacked boiling within the zone, within individual structures. We simply don't know yet. What we do see is that each of these structures, and this historic data shows this very nicely, is some of these stopes that they had were up to 45 meters wide, and the holes cut multiple high-grade mineralization zones within broad distances. So, and each of those had, as Steve said, narrative differences between them. So there's clearly multiple phases of fluids pumping into these multiply and repeatedly reactivated structural zones. So we could be looking at substantial stacking, and that could potentially give us a lot of depth continuation for the system.
Okay, no, that's great. And maybe one final question is there more historic data out there? Is this just part of one tranche, or is that to be determined?
Well, I think it's to be determined. It's worth pointing out that we've been working in the district for several years now, and then someone has finally come forward and said, "Hey, I've got a box of stuff in my basement. Are you interested in it?" And we suspected these kinds of data existed, as was pointed out by one of the other questions when someone's saying, "Well, what have you got on Quintera?" Clearly, the Terra Mines folks who were in there, whose data we got, didn't have the Quintera property. That's partly a reflection of how fractured the property ownership was in the district. So there's good reason to think there's additional data out there. We'll continue to try to drum that up, and I think that it's important to note that the fact that people are coming forward with that stuff, at least one person so far, suggests that they're getting comfortable with the fact that we're there. They think we're behaving well, we're behaving in a socially responsible and environmentally responsible manner, and they're comfortable with us being there. And that's something that only takes time to evolve. And I think that's a very positive reflection of the kind of job and the kind of public relations Steve and his team have established and maintained in the local community.
Okay, well, thanks for taking my questions, and very illuminating. Thanks for hosting the call.
Welcome. Thank you for the question, Michael. I'll now pass it over back to President CEO Darrell Rader for any final closing remarks. Darrell?
I just want to once again thank everybody for taking the time at this early hour to log into the webcast here. Once again, our apologies for some of the technical difficulties we encountered, but we hope to make these webcasts a bit more regular, especially with the expected news flow and developments in our Phase 2 program. For those of you that have additional follow-up questions or Otherwise, please access our website. We have up-to-date information on all the projects there, as well as our news release that we announced yesterday. As well, you're always welcome to contact Sunny Panu, who was on the call here, our Investor Relations Manager, and he can be reached, as you see on the final page here, at 778-330-0994. I wish everybody a good day, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. And just a last note, if you were not able to attend the call or want to revisit some of the information that we've been presenting this morning, we will have a replay available shortly on our website. So we'll send the details out on that, and you'll be able to see the presentation again. And you can ask any questions again directly to us. Thank you all for your support, and we'll see you soon. Authority, we can now close the call.
This concludes today's call. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.